to click like, subscribe, the bell notification, and whatever else YouTube has you clicking on to support us.
Hello, 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 and I'm Krelika Kane. We're going to talk about something a little bit different today. So we've been talking about a lot on the Japanese side of the world, but let's talk about a show that is a mainstay for 30 years and started out with teenagers with attitudes. That is Power Rangers. So when we think about Power Rangers, we do think about the teenagers. We think about the storylines of how it's always going to be related to kids, at least for the first few seasons. How we see the drama, the antics, the monster battles, the Zords, and the greatest thing ever when you look at it 30 years later. And that is where we come in with Tokunomics. So Power Rangers is the greatest cost-cutting endeavor ever taken in entertainment history. By the time it came out in the early 90s, we didn't have too many shows that did what Saban did with Power Rangers and succeed. I say that because we have had other Kamen Rider, Metal Heroes, and other things come to America and try to do this subtle integration of a Japanese show with American footage and failed. However, Power Rangers somehow found a way to do it right. And they could do it within a shoestring budget because of two things. One, they only had to write half of a show. And two, they were able to license the footage that they would need for practically everything that would be fighting, monster suits, any kind of battles, anything like that, where they didn't have to recreate and film it themselves. So when you think about Power Rangers, it took an element that, in listening to Tony Oliver talk and some of the other Power Rangers actors from the original, should have never worked. Especially cost-wise. Because one, all of the actors and actresses that started with the series, they had really little experience. Most of them were early stages of their careers or hadn't done anything truly notable. Not to say that as a terrible thing against them, but they were really unknowns. And they came in, auditioned for a show that I don't think anybody ever expected to succeed. So Hayao Saban purchased the rights to utilize footage from Zyuranger, the series that we actually talked about in our prior Tokunomics episode, and brought it to America and decided, rather than just bringing it to America and trying to beat for beat match the American side footage with the Japanese footage, they would just use the Japanese footage to help tell the American side story. So they decided to make this where you had Zarbon fighting this war against evil, which was Rita Repulsa. And they decided to take any of the fighting footage and a lot of the monster footage and blend that with their own created scenes. And in all honesty, it did really well. It did so well that they had to reach out to Japan and ask for more footage, where we get the quote-unquote Ju2 footage, where Toei was able to help with this by creating 33 episodes worth of fighting scenes, of mech scenes, of monster costumes, and so much more to help the American side get more episodes. So they could have a total of 74 episodes, I think it is approximately. Put in the chat if I'm wrong. Kaiju will watch this later and pick on me as well, but right now that's what I'm going with. So let's talk about the economics of this. So when we think about the illusion of the show Power Rangers, all we as American audiences would really know, because they didn't market it to be a blending of American and Japanese footage. And at that time in America, with the way television sets were, we were still in the VCR era. This is well before Blu-ray and everything else. Most times when things were being filmed for the American side and then blending with the Japanese, you wouldn't be able to tell a ton of difference, because the American side, they tried to make the sets somewhat resemble, as best as they could, the Japanese side, but obviously there was a lot of Japanese text and things like that. So they tried to limit what they could, but they put in American actors that were teenagers with attitudes. And I was at the cusp of being a teenager myself. I was 12, 13 when the show first started coming out. And I will say at that time, I did not believe any of these teenagers were attitudes, unless you thought Bulk and Skull, which they were my spirit animals because I was a goth kid too. Goth punk kid at that time. As you can see, I'm still wearing skulls. But they were supposed to be these stereotypes. You had the popular girl, you had the sporty girl, you had the hip-hop dancer dude, you had the nerdy dude, and then you had this all-American boy. And then when Tommy came in, you had the loner dude. And reminds me of a Transformers line of chicks dig loner bots. So it was this whole thing where you had all of these stereotypes, and for all the years that they did the teenager element, you always had that together. And truthfully, in normal circumstances, even in the 90s, these 5 teenagers with attitudes, once again, a little suspicious, would not have been friends in normal life. So it tried to do this element of they're teenagers, they work together, they're all good people inherently, even though you could think things about them based on their attitudes. So you were not looking at a show that was supposed to be high budget. It never even filmed itself as high budget. It was really more of a guerrilla filming experience. So what does that cost? So let's take a step back and think about what an average American show can typically cost to film and produce. And this doesn't include toys, this doesn't include merchandise, anything like that. This is just film, produce, and the marketing aspect, because you still have to create commercials of when it's going to air and trailers and things like that. So on average, and we're going to look at it in more modern money, and then we'll take a step back and look at it in historical numbers as well. So on average, an American television show, more so live action, but sometimes even animated, can cost between $500,000 to $1 million, possibly even more per episode, depending on what you're doing, especially if you have a lot of stunt work, especially if you have a lot of computer graphics, CGI, all of that. The more you have, the more expensive it's going to get, because of the fact that it's going to take more time to produce. That's why even more fancier shows tend to do lower episode counts. Think about all of your superhero shows, even when we had Flash, Arrow, or even when you have a lot of shows that have spectacle like Supernatural. The episodes that have a lot more glitz and glam and extra work behind it are going to cost more. So sometimes they'll shorten the episode count because they don't want to have to pay that much for every episode. So when we get into things like that, we have to think about, okay, let's step backwards. What would a show for Power Rangers cost even at that time? We're thinking still somewhat similar to Jew Ranger, maybe if not a little bit more. We're thinking about $250,000 to $500,000 per episode, because you still have to think about your paying throughout the course of the series, and thankfully over time this diminishes, is the cost of buying the footage. So when you think about that inherent cost, which could be $1 million, $10 million, whatever that contract is, which they have never shared what the original contract is for Power Rangers for that footage. But I'm going to go with what I would think it would make sense. And for the first series, I would think probably about $3 to $5 million. Because one, it was completely risk. No Japanese side was like, sure, we don't know what you're going to do with it, but have fun with it. Then you have the American side. People don't know what you're going to do with it, so we're just throwing away money. So when you think about in that aspect, let's say $5 million for easy math, and then you do 50 episodes. Across those 50 episodes, you are essentially putting $100,000 of that cost onto your budget. And sometimes a lot of companies will do this where they know they're going to have to do an upfront cost. And to help with the budget and the balance sheet, they might spread that cost that they're paying, even though they've already paid it, throughout the life cycle of production, so that when they get their results on revenue and they can look at their profits, they can already factor in for each episode. If we have $100,000 just for the cost of the show, then we put on anything else, and let's say it's $500,000 for that episode and they make $1 million, they've already paid for their show, they paid for everything else, so everything is revenue that can go into either future productions or into their pockets. So those are the things that a lot of businesses tend to do. So if we think about that, knowing that Power Rangers used Jew Ranger footage for about 1.5 years, and that's including Jew 2, they were able to keep their costs down, so that an episode probably would have cost them, even with having to charge back the original footage, probably about $200,000, $300,000 per episode, because stunt choreography was very minimal. All the main cast of the 5 to 6 Rangers, once Tommy came in, they all had to either know gymnastics or martial arts, or both, or dance, or whatever it was. So all of those 6 primary actors knew how to do choreography, so when they were doing any of their fighting unsuited, they didn't have to bring in stunt doubles. Everybody knew what they were doing. Then when you think about it, for all of their stunt actors, they were probably able to get them through SAG, not have to pay a ton of money because it was all union work. And same thing with all of their voice actors, for the monsters, for the villains, for everyone. So they were able to keep everything low cost. And because the on-screen actors didn't have a lot of credits to their name, they didn't negotiate a ton of money. So all of the costs for pretty much everybody on screen that had actual speaking lines was very minimal. So on average, it was about $250,000 to $300,000 per episode. And that is still a lot of money, even in the 90s, because you are putting a lot together. Now, how did they make this work? So this is where it gets really interesting on the economics part of it. Because not only did you have all of this filming aspects, You had the revenue from the TV show being watched, and they found great times to have it watched. You also had marketing. You had guerrilla marketing because you had word of mouth. It wasn't like today where everything's on the internet, so everybody knows everything. This was newspapers, other magazine publications, TV commercials, events in your local area. So you had the filming, you had the marketing, you had the shows being aired at prime times for kids. That all brought them in. The next thing that Saban did that was really smart is they worked with Bandai, who already was in Japan. So they were able to take advantage of bringing toys into America. Obviously, they had to be different. So they were able to license the toys and license new toys because the second female ranger in Power Rangers, Trini, was a Yellow Ranger, was a girl in America, but was originally a boy in Japan. The character's name is actually Boy. So they had to resculpt a second female character when they did do it. So they had a lot of that. They did a lot of events. So one event that Tony Oliver had talked about in LA area is they hosted a Power Rangers event, and they had put it at a convention center. They didn't think it was going to be as popular as it was, but at the time, I think it was either 93 or 94, the popularity of it so much shut down the LA highway because of traffic. And that is huge for a show that barely had any American footage. So it was awesome to see. And it was awesome to see how it was put together. So now we look at why it's worked so long. The reason why Power Rangers has worked so long and why it's still beloved in America is due to the fact that it translated shows, maybe not one for one, but it translated shows in Japan into an American audience, for American audiences. So it was able to give kids of that age and time, and even adults, an opportunity to see spandexed heroes fight. And while that sounds silly to say it like that, it was huge. We didn't have those types of shows. Yes, we had Voltron, Robotech, but those were animated. There weren't many superhero shows that had color-coordinated heroes that were live action. Because we really didn't even have Marvel or DC shows at that time. We primarily had everything animated because it was, truthfully, in the 90s, animation domination. Disney, Warner, Fox had all of these cartoon shows. And it was really one of the only live action shows that kids had that was targeted for them. And over the years, it continued that. And it would also take different storylines that Japan did, translated them into storylines that worked better for American audiences. From what I've heard, I have not seen SPD, but I've heard about the immense popularity of Power Rangers SPD in America because of the fact that it did something very different than Deca Ranger. RPM, which I actually watched. I'm not a fan of Go Launcher, but RPM was incredibly different, taking this dystopian, really violent type of premise, Mad Max even, and turning it into a kids show. Those are the things that they were able to do in America by using Japanese footage and being able to splice it where it needed to go. Now, early seasons of Power Rangers did use more Japanese footage than American footage, But as they went along, obviously the stories evolved, stories developed where they could use more American footage, even take some of the costumes from Japan, do their own American choreography of fighting and things like that, and reduce how much Japanese footage they used. To the point where we're at today, where now Disney is going to do 100% original Power Rangers. Now, is that a good thing? Or is that a bad thing? And I hesitate as I say this because it's hard to say. When we got to newer seasons of Power Rangers, I would say when they did the Go Busters version, and please forgive me, I don't remember the Power Rangers equivalent. I'm actually really bad about that. When they got to doing the more modern stuff, the show actually cost more because they were bringing in more quality. They were bringing in more actors, and they had a higher production cost because they're doing much bigger productions. Even if it didn't seem like it on the American side, they absolutely were. And so episodes would start costing the traditional American amount of about $1 million per episode. So that is, after a while, not always sustainable if the revenue is starting to drop. And by having Power Rangers go from Fox to Nickelodeon to Disney and now to Netflix and now wherever it is, because I don't know if it's still on Netflix or if I think it's on Netflix still and possibly Disney. But what is happening is because it's in so many different places, people don't have the accessibility to watch it as easily as they did before. So what does this mean for the future of Power Rangers? Well, let's think about it in two ways. One, they have many, many years of Super Sentai seasons that were never brought to America that could be translated into a Power Rangers show. Because the last one they did bring to America was Go Busters, which came directly after Gokaiger. They have not brought in any of the other future shows. So they have tons of content that they can use. Well, they did bring in Ryu Soldier, but that was a mess. Then you think about the other side of it. Now that Super Sentai is over, is there a need for Power Rangers? And that's a question that the fandom really has to ask. And this is where I think not only the fandom has to ask this, but I think this is something that Hasbro has in their heads as well. Then the final question is, you have a company like Hasbro that does own the full and complete license of Power Rangers. Do they feel that it's worth it to utilize the franchise? And that is the question where I think it does potentially go into the area of making them villains, because of the fact that they have stopped pretty much everything that they've done toy production wise, or have sold toy production to Playmates, that you don't have a lot there. So at the end of the day, the question that should always be asked to anybody who loves Power Rangers is it still worth it to you? Would you tune in to a new Power Ranger series? Or are you just happy with your nostalgia, that similar to Super Sentai, similar to Kamen Rider, Ultraman, or any superhero television show out there? Are you happy just with your nostalgia? Sometimes nostalgia is enough where you don't need to have new, and sometimes nostalgia is not enough where you feel like there is more that could be told story-wise. And this is where we all have to be. Now, when we think about it from a cost perspective, any new Power Rangers, especially if they use completely original footage, is going to be simply more expensive than what they've done in the past. Because even if they were using 50% American, 50% Japanese, or even 70% American, 30% Japanese, you still had a portion of footage that you didn't have to refilm, that you didn't have to recostume or set up or organize or do anything special with. And now you have to be responsible for 100% of footage, from fighting to choreography of the monster battles and all of that, and of the fighting in general, and then storylines for the actors. How are the actors going to build up to this fighting? Because there always has to be some sort of issue, narrative that's going to come into play. So is Disney going to want to foot that cost if Hasbro just leaves it in their hands? And I will say, with the venture that we've had with Doctor Who recently, not for very long. So I'm going to end it here with Power Rangers was the smartest move that Haim Saban could ever do. Not only did it make him and his family rich, but it also gave millions of kids around the world access to something they never had, because Super Sentai in its original format was not shared with the world. And it allowed kids to experience and enjoy something that they would have never have known about otherwise. And it also shows that for anyone who is interested in trying something, take a risk. Economically, it can be terrifying, but if you don't take that risk, you'll never know if you can succeed. And that is where Power Rangers demonstrates the success story of trying, failing, and not giving up. So thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully you liked this episode. I am still learning and evolving as I go on. So if you have any feedback, any thoughts, any future episodes, and I have been keeping up with the comments, and I am going to look at the merchandising aspect of it, not simply just the toys, but merchandising, because it's kind of crazy in Japan, the things they do merchandising wise, and how that can affect a television show. I'm also going to talk about the cost of Kamen Rider and Ultraman, and even an episode I really want to do on the cost of Ultraman not coming to America as early as it could or should have, because of bad dealings that they had with some partners of theirs. And as I go on with Tokunomics, if you want to see anything that's not Toku related, I'm happy to do another series specifically on anime and the costs there as well. So thank you very much. I'm Corella Kane, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!